Marcus Johnson was born different from other children in his neighborhood. His legs didn't work the way they should. The doctors told his mother that Marcus had cerebral palsy, a condition that made his muscles tight and movement difficult. But what Marcus lacked in physical ability, he made up for with his voice. In their small apartment in Detroit, Marcus lived with his mother, Sarah. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Their neighborhood wasn't the nicest, with crumbling buildings and streets that needed fixing, but it was home. When Marcus turned 8, something magical happened. Sarah was washing dishes one evening when she heard a sound so beautiful it made her drop a plate. Marcus was singing along to the old radio they kept in the kitchen. His voice was clear and strong, hitting notes that professional singers would envy. "Marcus, baby, where did you learn to sing like that?" Sarah asked, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Marcus just shrugged. "I don't know, Mama. The music just feels right inside me." From that day forward, music became Marcus's escape. While other children ran and played in the streets, Marcus sat on their apartment steps with his crutches beside him, singing songs he heard on the radio. People walking by would stop and listen, sometimes for several minutes, amazed at the power coming from such a small boy. His elementary school music teacher, Ms. Patterson, recognized his gift immediately. "This child has something special," she told Sarah during a parent meeting. "Something I haven't heard in 30 years of teaching." Ms. Patterson let Marcus use the school's music room during lunch breaks. She taught him how to control his breathing and how to read simple sheet music. Marcus soaked up these lessons like a sponge. By the time he was 10, Marcus could sing everything from gospel to soul to pop. His favorite songs were the old classics by Stevie Wonder and Sam Cooke. When he sang "A Change Is Gonna Come," even the toughest kids in school would get quiet and listen. Life wasn't easy for Marcus. Some children made fun of the way he walked with his metal crutches. Getting around school was hard, and some days his legs hurt so badly he could barely move. But when he opened his mouth to sing, none of that mattered. When he sang, he wasn't the disabled boy anymore. He was just pure talent. As Marcus grew into his early teens, Sarah noticed how money was getting tighter. Medical bills piled up on their kitchen table. The special braces Marcus needed for his legs were expensive, and their insurance covered less each year. One day when Marcus was 14, he overheard his mother crying on the phone about being behind on rent. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mother had given up so much for him. There had to be something he could do to help. The next afternoon, instead of coming straight home from school, Marcus asked his friend Jamal to help him get to the busy corner near the local coffee shop. With Jamal's help, Marcus settled onto a small folding stool, placed his crutches beside him, and took a deep breath. As the evening crowd walked home from work, Marcus's voice rose above the street noise. He sang "Stand By Me" with such feeling that people stopped in their tracks. By the time he finished his 3rd song, a small crowd had gathered. Someone dropped a $5 bill into his empty baseball cap. Marcus sang until his throat was tired. When he counted the money afterward, he had $27. It wasn't much, but when he handed it to his mother that night, her eyes filled with tears. "This is just the beginning, Mama," Marcus promised. "My voice is going to take care of us someday." He had no idea how right he was. 1 year passed, and Marcus Johnson's life changed completely. Now 15, he had become a regular fixture on the corner of Wilson and Maple Streets. After school, he would make his way there, his crutches digging into his armpits as he carefully navigated the cracked sidewalks of Detroit. Sarah worried about her son. "Marcus, you should be focusing on your schoolwork, not singing on street corners," she said one evening as she massaged his sore shoulders. "Mama, I am doing my schoolwork. I finished my homework during lunch," Marcus replied. "And look what I made today." He pulled out $82 from his pocket. Sarah's eyes widened. That money would pay for the electricity bill that had the red, "Final No TIC" stamp on it. She wanted to refuse it, to tell her son that it wasn't his job to support them, but reality was harsh. The medical bills kept coming, and her jobs barely covered their basic needs. "Just promise me you'll be careful out there," she finally said, hugging him tight. Marcus's singing spot became known throughout the neighborhood. Some days, a kind shop owner named Mr. Powell would bring him hot chocolate when the weather turned cool. Other days, Mrs. Washington from the hair salon would check on him during her smoke breaks, making sure no one bothered him. That boy has the voice of an angel trapped in a broken body, Mrs. Washington told anyone who would listen. The Lord gives special gifts to special people. Marcus developed a routine. Mondays were for slow songs that made people think of love and loss. Wednesdays were upbeat tunes that had people dancing as they walked by. Fridays were for gospel songs that reminded him of church with his grandmother before she passed away. The regular listeners began to request songs. A man in a business suit who passed by every day at 5:17 p.m. always asked for What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. An elderly woman who walked her dog past the corner would smile when Marcus sang My Girl. Not everyone was kind. Some teenagers from another school mocked his disability, imitating his walk and laughing. A few people complained to shop owners about the noise. Once, someone stole his day's earnings while he took a break to use the bathroom at the gas station. But Marcus kept singing, through rain and mild snow, through heat waves and wind. He only stayed home on the most bitter winter days when Sarah insisted, or when his legs hurt too badly to stand. His grades stayed good. His English teacher, Mr. Torres, was impressed by Marcus's essays about music history. "You write about music like you understand its soul," he told Marcus one day after class. "That's because music understands my soul first," Marcus answered with a smile. By the middle of the year, Marcus was bringing home enough money to help with groceries and bills. Sarah found a slightly better apartment with fewer stairs, making it easier for Marcus to get around. It was still in a rough part of town, but it had a small bedroom just for him, where he could practice his singing without disturbing the neighbors. Marcus created a special savings jar labeled Future. Into it went a few dollars from each day's earnings. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he dreamed of music school or proper voice lessons someday. One regular listener was Officer Garcia, who patrolled the area. At first, he had come to check if Marcus needed a permit to perform. But after hearing him sing America the Beautiful with such emotion, the officer became a protector instead. "You're bringing something beautiful to these streets, son," Officer Garcia told him. "Don't you stop." On Marcus's 16th birthday, his regular listeners surprised him. They had collected enough money to buy him a small battery-powered speaker and microphone. It wasn't fancy, but it meant Marcus wouldn't strain his voice so much. That night, as Sarah tucked the day's earnings into their emergency fund envelope, she found a note Marcus had written. "Singing isn't just how I make money, Mama. It's how I tell the world I'm still here, still fighting. Every dollar means we're winning that fight together." Sarah placed the note on their refrigerator, right next to Marcus's school photo. Her son might have been born with a broken body, but his spirit was stronger than anyone she had ever known. The autumn air turned crisp as Marcus celebrated his 17th birthday. 2 years of singing on the corner had made him a local fixture in the neighborhood. His voice had deepened, growing richer and more soulful with each passing month. People who had never stepped foot in this part of Detroit now made special trips just to hear the miracle boy with the golden voice. One Tuesday afternoon in October, the sky threatened rain. Marcus debated going home early but decided to stay when he saw a group of regular listeners waiting. Among them was an unfamiliar face, a young woman with colorful beads in her braids and a camera hanging around her neck. "That's Jasmine," whispered Mrs. Washington as she passed by. "She goes to the community college. Studies film or something artistic like that." Marcus nodded politely at the newcomer and began his first song. The pain in his legs was worse today, making him lean heavily on his crutches. But as always, when the music took over, the pain seemed to fade into the background. He closed his eyes and began singing Bridge Over Troubled Water. The lyrics about offering strength to someone in need felt personal to Marcus. He thought of his mother's sacrifices, of the kindness shown by neighbors who looked out for him, of his own determination to keep going despite the odds. Unknown to Marcus, Jasmine had raised her camera. She captured every emotion that crossed his face as he sang. She recorded the way his body, though physically limited, seemed to grow taller with each powerful note. She filmed the reactions of people passing by, how they stopped, transfixed, many with tears forming in their eyes. That night, before going to bed, Jasmine uploaded the video to her social media accounts. She titled it simply, "The Most Beautiful Voice I've Ever Heard. Detroit Street Singer." Marcus woke the next morning to frantic knocking at their apartment door. It was Mr. Powell from the coffee shop, waving his phone excitedly. "Marcus, you're everywhere online. The video has over 1 million views already." Sarah and Marcus huddled around Mr. Powell's phone, watching in disbelief. There was Marcus, singing his heart out on their familiar street corner. The comments section overflowed with amazement. "Who is this kid? He needs a record deal now. I've never been moved to tears by a song before today. The way he sings despite his disability. True inspiration." By noon, the video had reached 5 million views. By dinner time, local news vans appeared in the neighborhood, reporters eager to interview the sensation from the viral video. Sarah was protective. "They just want to use your story to get views," she warned Marcus. But eventually, she agreed to one interview with Channel 7, whose reporter had been respectful and patient. The reporter, Ms. Daniels, set up cameras on their usual corner. "Tell us about your music, Marcus," she said kindly. "Music is the place where I'm free," Marcus explained, his voice soft but confident. "When I sing, nobody sees my crutches. They just hear me, the real me." The interview aired that night. By morning, national news picked up the story. Marcus's phone, an old model Sarah had bought secondhand, wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. A few talent scouts reached out through social media. One local radio station invited Marcus to visit their studio. A church in a wealthy suburb asked if he would perform at their Sunday service for a small fee. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like everything might change. Marcus allowed himself to dream of recording studios and music lessons. Sarah dared to imagine a life where they didn't count every penny. But after 2 weeks, the attention began to fade. The viral video became yesterday's news. The talent scouts who had reached out never followed through with concrete offers. The radio station appearance brought applause, but no lasting opportunities. Their lives returned largely to normal. Marcus went back to his corner, singing for tips. More people recognized him now, and some asked for selfies, but the promised transformation hadn't materialized. "I'm sorry, baby," Sarah said one night, seeing the disappointment in Marcus's eyes. "I thought this might be your big break." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It's okay, Mama. More people come to hear me now, which means more money for us. And someone important will hear me someday. I just have to keep singing." What Marcus didn't know was that his moment of true change was still coming, and it would arrive in a way he could never have predicted. The first cough came on a Tuesday, a small tickle in Marcus's throat that he ignored. By Friday, it had grown into something that shook his entire body. Still, Marcus bundled up in his thickest jacket and made his way to his corner. "You don't sound right today," said Officer Garcia, stopping by on his patrol. The concern in his eyes was clear as he watched Marcus lean heavily on his crutches. "Just a little cold," Marcus insisted between coughs. "Can't afford to miss a day." The truth was, winter had come early to Detroit that year. November brought bitter winds and icy rain that seemed to cut right through Marcus's worn jacket. But their rent had gone up, and Sarah's car had broken down, needing expensive repairs so she could get to work. They needed every dollar Marcus could earn. That night, Marcus's temperature rose. Sarah placed a cool cloth on his forehead and gave him the last of their cough medicine. "No singing tomorrow," she said firmly. "You need to rest." For once, Marcus didn't argue. His chest felt tight, and each breath brought a painful wheeze. He slept fitfully, caught in feverish dreams where he sang to empty streets. By Monday, Marcus couldn't get out of bed. His coughing had worsened, and he struggled to catch his breath. Sarah took the day off work, something she couldn't afford to do, and rushed him to the emergency room. "Pneumonia," the doctor said after examining Marcus and taking chest x-rays. "Quite serious. He'll need to be admitted." Sarah's face fell. Hospital meant bills they couldn't pay, but looking at Marcus's pale face and blue-tinged lips, she knew there was no choice. For a week, Marcus lay in the hospital bed, connected to oxygen and receiving antibiotics through an IV. Sarah slept in the uncomfortable chair beside him, going to work only when Marcus's condition began to improve. During those quiet hospital nights, Marcus thought about his singing, about the viral video that had brought so much hope, and then so little change. He wondered if he was foolish to believe his voice could truly save them. On the day Marcus was finally released from the hospital, they returned home to find a notice taped to their apartment door. The building had been purchased by a development company. All tenants had 60 days to vacate, The entire block was being demolished to make way for luxury condominiums. Where will we go? Marcus asked, his voice still raspy from his illness. Sarah tried to smile, but Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. We'll figure it out, she said. We always do. But finding a new place proved nearly impossible. Their neighborhood was changing fast. Rents had skyrocketed as old buildings were replaced with trendy shops and expensive apartments. The few affordable places weren't accessible for someone with Marcus's mobility issues. The hospital bills arrived next, thousands of dollars that their insurance didn't cover. Sarah took on a fourth job, working overnight shifts at a 24-hour diner. Marcus barely saw her now. She came home just long enough to shower and change clothes before heading to the next job. You need to focus on getting better, she told Marcus when he suggested returning to his corner. No more singing in the cold. But 2 weeks later, with Sarah asleep after a grueling 16-hour workday, Marcus made a decision. He carefully wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table. Gone to sing. Will be careful. Love you. His lungs weren't fully healed. Each deep breath still brought a slight pain. But with only 6 weeks left before they had to leave their home and no prospects for a new one, desperation pushed Marcus back to his corner. The day was gray and cold, with patches of snow on the ground. Marcus set up his small speaker, which had been repaired with duct tape after being damaged in the rain. His fingers felt stiff as he adjusted his scarf. The first notes came out shaky. His voice, once so strong and clear, now cracked on the high notes. A few people walked by without stopping, something that had rarely happened before his illness. Marcus closed his eyes. Please, he whispered to whatever force might be listening. I need my voice back. We have nowhere else to go. He began again, pushing through the pain in his chest. This time, he chose the song that had made him viral, Bridge Over Troubled Water. As he sang about darkness and times of trouble, the words felt more real than ever before. What Marcus didn't know was that his plea had been heard, not by any mystical force, but by fate, which was about to change the course of his life forever. Detroit's winter had grown colder as December arrived. Marcus stood on his corner, his breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. His singing had improved since his first day back after the pneumonia, but he still couldn't hit the highest notes that once came so easily. The tips had been smaller too, just enough to help with groceries, but nowhere near what they needed for a new apartment deposit. Today marked 5 weeks until they would be forced to leave their home. Sarah had dark circles under her eyes from working around the clock, and Marcus felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him like a physical burden. Across town, in the gleaming Renaissance Center that towered over the Detroit River, Elaine Chen sat in a conference room surrounded by city officials and business leaders. At 38, she was the founder and CEO of Future Tech Solutions, a company valued at billions. Her sleek black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blue suit that spoke of wealth without flaunting it. Ms. Chen, we're thrilled you're considering Detroit for your new innovation campus, the mayor said, smiling broadly. It would bring hundreds of jobs to the city. Elaine nodded politely but felt distracted. She had built her empire from nothing after immigrating to America as a child. Now, with more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, she found herself increasingly disconnected from the world that had shaped her. I'd like to see more of the city, she said suddenly, interrupting a presentation about tax incentives. Not just the redeveloped areas, the real Detroit. An hour later, Elaine sat in the back of her company car as her driver, Marcus, navigated away from downtown. They were headed to visit a community center in one of the neighborhoods Future Tech was considering for its outreach programs. There's construction ahead, Miss Chen, the driver announced. GPS suggests a detour through some side streets. Elaine nodded absently, reviewing emails on her tablet. The car turned down an unfamiliar street lined with old brick buildings, many with boarded windows. As they stopped at a red light, Elaine heard it, a voice that made her look up from her screen. Through the car window, she saw a thin black teenager with crutches, singing with his eyes closed. The song was Lean on Me, and despite the obvious strain in his voice, there was something about it that reached straight into Elaine's chest and squeezed. Stop the car, she said suddenly. Ma'am. Her driver looked concerned. Please park. I need a moment. The driver found a spot half a block away. Elaine stepped out, pulling her coat tighter around her. She walked back toward the singing boy and sat down on a bench across the street. She didn't approach him, didn't drop money in his collection cup. She simply listened. Marcus sang 3 more songs, unaware of his important audience. When he finished Amazing Grace, he finally noticed the Asian woman in the expensive coat watching him intently. Something about her stillness made him nervous. Was she from the city, coming to tell him he couldn't sing here anymore? "You have an extraordinary gift," she said, finally crossing the street toward him. "I'm Elaine." No last name, no explanation of who she was or why she was in this neighborhood. Just Elaine. "I'm Marcus," he replied, shifting his weight on his crutches. Up close, he could see that her coat probably cost more than 6 months of their rent. "Do you want me to sing something specific?" "Why are you singing here? In this cold?" she asked instead of answering. Normally, Marcus would give a simple answer to strangers, but something in Elaine's direct gaze made him tell the truth. "We're being evicted. My mom works 4 jobs, and I'm trying to help save enough for a new place. Plus medical bills." He gestured to his legs. "Cerebral palsy. And pneumonia recently." Elaine didn't offer immediate sympathy or reach for her wallet as most kind-hearted wealthy people did. Instead, she asked, "How long have you been singing here?" "Almost 2 years now," Marcus said. "I went viral for a bit, but nothing really came of it." Elaine nodded slowly. "Would you sing one more song? Your choice." Marcus thought for a moment, then began "A Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke. It was a song about hope in the face of hardship, about believing that better days were ahead despite all evidence to the contrary. As the last note faded, Elaine remained silent. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple white with just a name and phone number. "I'd like to talk more," she said, handing it to Marcus. "Tomorrow, if possible, bring your mother." Before Marcus could ask any questions, she walked back to her car and disappeared around the corner, leaving him staring at the card in his hand. The name on it read simply, Elaine Chen, CEO. "She's probably just another rich person who wants to feel good about helping the poor kid," Sarah said, studying the business card Marcus had given her. They sat at their small kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating the room to save on electricity. Marcus shook his head. "She was different, Mom. She didn't give me money or tell me how inspirational I am. She just listened." After much debate, Sarah agreed to meet this mysterious Elaine Chen. She couldn't take time off work, so they arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the diner where Sarah worked the morning shift. The next day, Marcus arrived early, nervously adjusting his second-hand sweater. When Elaine walked in, several heads turned. She wasn't flashy, but her quiet confidence and well-made clothes marked her as someone who didn't belong in this part of town. "Marcus," she said with a small smile, sitting across from him. "Thank you for coming." Sarah arrived 10 minutes later, still wearing her waitress uniform, looking exhausted but wary. "Miss Chen, I'm Sarah Johnson, Marcus's mother." Elaine stood and extended her hand. "Please call me Elaine. I'm grateful you could make time to meet." After ordering coffee and hot chocolate for Marcus, Elaine got straight to the point. "I built a technology company worth billions of dollars," she said matter-of-factly. "But I started with nothing. My parents cleaned office buildings at night while I slept on a cot in the supply closet. I know what it's like to have talent but no opportunities." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, what does this have to do with my son?" Elaine turned to Marcus. "Your voice is extraordinary. Not just the natural talent, but the emotion behind it. You sing like someone who understands both pain and hope." She paused. "I don't want to give you charity. I want to invest in your future." "Invest?" Marcus repeated, confused. "I'm proposing a partnership," Elaine explained. "Professional vocal training with the best coaches. Medical specialists for your cerebral palsy. Completion of your education, a platform to share your gift properly." Sarah laughed without humor. "And why would a billionaire technology CEO do this for a boy from the projects?" Elaine's expression remained serious. "Because talent is being wasted every day in neighborhoods like yours, because your son has something special that the world should hear, and because I can." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "This is my proposal. Everything would be structured as an investment in Marcus's career. If he succeeds commercially, I receive a percentage of his earnings for 10 years. If not, the investment is written off. No debt, No obligations. Marcus looked at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. This is real? Very real, Elaine replied. But it won't be easy. It means hard work, intensive training, probably some surgery and physical therapy for your mobility. It means finishing school while working on your music. I don't believe in handouts, Marcus. I believe in opportunities and the determination to make the most of them. Sarah flipped through the documents, her waitress hands rough against the smooth paper. This is too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch is that I expect excellence, Elaine said. I won't invest in mediocrity. If Marcus isn't willing to work harder than he's ever worked before, this ends. I'll cover 1 year of housing and medical care regardless, but the rest depends on his commitment. She looked directly at Marcus. I heard something in your voice yesterday, something that reminded me of myself at your age. Hungry, determined, unwilling to accept the limitations others placed on you. Was I wrong? Marcus straightened in his chair. No, ma'am, you weren't wrong. For the first time, Elaine smiled fully. Then we have a starting point. Sarah still looked uncertain. Why not just set up a scholarship program or donate to a music school? Why Marcus specifically? Elaine was quiet for a moment. Because sometimes, changing one life completely is more powerful than changing 1,000 lives partially. I want to see what happens when someone with Marcus's gift gets every opportunity instead of none. She stood to leave. Take 3 days to think about it. Talk to a lawyer if you wish. I'll cover the consultation. This decision belongs to both of you. As she walked toward the door, Marcus called out, Ms. Chen, how did you get from sleeping in a supply closet to running a billion-dollar company? Elaine turned back. 1 day at a time, Marcus. With a lot of help along the way, she paused. And please, call me Elaine. 3 days after their coffee shop meeting, Marcus and Sarah signed Elaine's contract. Within a week, they moved into a modest but accessible 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. The elevator worked, the doorways were wide enough for Marcus's crutches, and for the first time in years, Sarah didn't need to worry about making rent. Marcus's new life began immediately. A medical team evaluated his condition and designed a treatment plan. The first hurdle was surgery to release the tight muscles in his legs, followed by months of intensive physical therapy. This will hurt, warned Dr. Patterson, the specialist Elaine had found. The progress will be slow, and there will be days you'll wish you never agreed to it. Marcus nodded, his face serious. I understand, but I'm ready. The surgery was even more painful than expected. Marcus spent 2 weeks in the hospital, tears streaming down his face as nurses helped him move his legs for the first time after the operation. Sarah stayed by his side whenever she wasn't at her new job. Elaine had found her a position with decent hours and benefits at a company she had connections with. You can quit if you want to, Marcus told his mother one particularly difficult night. We could go back to how things were. Sarah squeezed his hand. Not a chance. We're seeing this through. Physical therapy dominated the next 6 months. 3 times a week, Marcus worked with specialists who pushed him to his limits. He learned to stand straighter, to put more weight on his legs, to take steps with less dependence on his crutches. Each small victory was celebrated. Each setback met with determination to try again. Alongside the physical work, Marcus's education continued. A private tutor helped him catch up on the subjects he had missed during his years of juggling school and street performing. To his surprise, Marcus discovered he had a talent for mathematics and science, subjects he had previously neglected. Then there was the vocal training. Elaine had found Marcus a coach named Anthony, a former opera singer who had worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry. Your natural talent is remarkable, Anthony told Marcus during their first session, but you've been using your voice all wrong, restraining your vocal cords, which is why you had so much trouble after your illness. Learning proper technique was frustrating. Marcus had to unlearn habits he'd developed over years of street performing. Sometimes he felt like he was going backward. I sounded better before, he complained one day after a particularly difficult lesson. Anthony shook his head. You sounded more raw before. Now you're learning control. Trust the process. Throughout it all, Elaine checked in regularly. She didn't hover or micromanage, but she made it clear that she was monitoring Marcus's progress. Every month, she would visit to hear him sing and review reports from his doctors and teachers. Are you disappointed? Marcus asked after a session where he had struggled with a new vocal exercise. Elaine considered the question. No, I'm impressed by your resilience. Do you know how many people would have given up by now? There were dark moments too. As Marcus's body changed and his voice developed, he sometimes felt lost. Who was he if not the disabled boy singing on the street corner? The weight of Elaine's investment pressed on him. What if he failed after all this? One evening, after a particularly grueling day of therapy and vocal training, Marcus broke down. I can't do this, he told Sarah, his voice cracking. Everyone expects so much, and I'm just a kid from Detroit who got lucky. Sarah sat beside him on his bed. You know what I see? I see my son who sang through pain and cold for 2 years to help keep a roof over our heads. That wasn't luck, that was courage and determination. She handed him a small notebook. Elaine dropped this off for you. Inside was a handwritten note. At your age, I failed my first major coding competition. I was so embarrassed I wanted to quit. Instead, I used that failure to push myself harder. Your journey isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more fully yourself. Marcus ran his fingers over the words. Below the note was a list of famous musicians who had overcome significant obstacles. That night, for the first time in months, Marcus sang just for himself, not for Anthony, not for Elaine, not for his future. He sang because music was still the place where his soul felt free. And somehow, in that moment of singing without pressure, his voice sounded better than it ever had before. 18 months had passed since that cold day when Elaine Chen had first heard Marcus singing on a Detroit street corner. Now, at 19 years old, Marcus stood backstage at the Grand Theater, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his bow tie. 5 minutes, Mr. Johnson, a stagehand called, giving him a thumbs up. Marcus nodded, taking deep breaths the way Anthony had taught him. He still used a cane. The surgeries and physical therapy had improved his mobility significantly, but he would always have some limitations from his cerebral palsy. The doctors had been clear about that from the beginning. But the cane was now a sleek, custom-made piece, more a symbol of his journey than something he resented. It matched his tailored suit, which fit his taller, stronger frame perfectly. Sarah appeared beside him, her eyes shining with tears. Look at you, she said, straightening his already straight tie. My baby, about to sing in front of all these important people. The event was a benefit concert for a new foundation, the Johnson Chen Arts Accessibility Initiative. Its mission was to provide music and arts education to young people with disabilities and those from underserved communities. Tonight was its official launch, with tickets going for $5,000 each. Is she here? Marcus asked, peering around the crowded backstage area. Of course I'm here, came Elaine's voice from behind him. Unlike the first time they met, Elaine was dressed formally in an elegant black gown. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from benefactor and recipient to something more complex, not quite friends, but partners in a shared vision. Elaine had been tough but fair, pushing Marcus when he needed it, stepping back when he needed to find his own way. Are you ready? She asked. Marcus took another deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The journey hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks, a vocal cord inflammation that had required 2 weeks of complete silence, a period of depression when Marcus questioned if he was worthy of the investment being made in him, moments when he missed the simplicity of his old life. But there had been triumphs too. Completing his high school education with honors, learning to drive a specially adapted car, recording his first professional demos in a real studio, and most importantly, finding his authentic voice, both musically and personally. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome to the stage, for his first professional performance, Mr. Marcus Johnson. The audience applauded as Marcus walked onto the stage, his gait still showing signs of his disability, but moving with a confidence he had never known before. A single spotlight illuminated him as he took his place at the microphone. Good evening, he said, his speaking voice strong and clear. 2 years ago, I was singing on a street corner to help my mom pay our bills. Today, I'm here because one person believed that my voice deserved to be heard. He paused, looking toward the wings where Elaine stood watching. But this journey hasn't just been about me. It's about all the talented young people who just need a chance. The kind of chance I was given. The piano introduction began, and Marcus closed his eyes. He had chosen to perform A Change Is Gonna Come, the same song he had sung for Elaine that fateful day. But this time, his voice carried all the technical training and emotional growth of the past 18 months. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. In the front row, several music industry executives exchanged meaningful glances. At the back of the theater, a group of teenagers from Marcus's old neighborhood, brought here by special invitation, cheered the loudest. Backstage after the performance, a reporter asked Marcus what was next for him. "Music will always be my first love," Marcus replied. "But the foundation is just as important. For every kid like me who gets discovered, there are hundreds more with amazing gifts who never get the chance to shine." Later that night, after the crowds had gone, Marcus stood alone on the empty stage. He thought about the corner where he had once summed for loose change, about the hospital room where he had wondered if his dream was over, about all the hours of practice and pain and perseverance. "The street corner made me who I am," he said quietly to himself, "but this is where I belong now." As he walked off stage, leaning lightly on his cane, Marcus Johnson wasn't just a boy with a good voice anymore. He was an artist with a purpose, a voice for those still waiting to be heard.